Okay, now our interview with Patrick Wood.
Once something starts like this that spreads like wildfire, it's very difficult to get people off of the narrative. It's just tough. And people get used to it. They get their own ideas. They don't read the law. They don't read the executive orders. I see this in Arizona all the time. Stores doing things, locking people out if you don't have a mask. I said, do you understand that all the way up and down the line from the governor to the mayor here in our town have provided a medical exemption, for instance, for people if they feel that they cannot wear a face mask? Oh, I never saw that. Well, could I show it to you? You pull out the document, show it to them. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. I never saw that. Well, okay, they're ignorant and they don't know until somebody comes along and challenges them. They don't know. This is going to be very hard to get the face mask out of society again and to get people, out of this mode of limiting lockdowns and stuff, social distancing. It's just insane. But it's going
Yeah.
to take a lot of time. Even if a governor like DeSantis says, stop it, doesn't mean everybody's going to just stop it.
Is there a mask requirement in Arizona?
Well, yes and no. There is a mask. There are local mask mandates. Let me put it that way, in counties and cities of one type or another. It depends on the city and the county. But even the counties, for instance, that don't have a mask mandate, like the one out east of us here, does not have a mask mandate. There are still stores wearing masks and people wearing masks in that county.
Right. Or signs on the store that say no entry without mask.
Well, they do, and we found kind of end run ways around it. For instance, restaurants with bars have been in this particular county I'm talking about have received a visit from the state liquor board. Now, the state liquor board controls the liquor license, right? They don't have otherwise. They don't have anything to do with that city or that county. Means nothing to them. Liquor board representative comes out and talks to the bar owner and says, if you don't comply, we're going to pull your liquor license. That's extortion. Pure and simple. Just extortion. They have no business doing that, no right to do it, and yet they come out and say it. Scares the store half to death, or the restaurant bar half to death. Oh my gosh, I better just do it or I'm done. That's my business.
Are you surprised at how Americans have reacted, generally speaking, to all these restrictions?
I am. And I'm thinking at this point, they're getting more and more sick of it. And they're starting to see through it.
So
this is not about the virus.
So you would have originally guessed that Americans would have pushed back more against the restrictions, but you're seeing it finally happen. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there's more pushback now than there ever has been before. Initially, the media, the mainstream media, was so skilled at delivering a scary narrative that people believed. You think back to, was it Orson Welles that did War of the Worlds on the radio back in the 30s? And everybody across America thought it was real. They thought they were being invaded by aliens. It was so realistic. Well, this narrative was just boom. It just came on all of a sudden, scared the dickens out of people. And in a panic, people will take any kind of suggestion that's offered to them by authorities. That's been proven many times over at least decades. And so they did. They just started doing the things the government told them to do. Put on a mask, social distance, lockdown, self-quarantine, and then the panic spread from there into the corporate world. First, it was just people. Then it was the corporate world.
Well, and Americans, genuinely, for the most part, want to be good citizens. So I think there's that component to it. And then I also make the point that life is pretty good in America. Being locked in your home, you still got your television set, lots of movies, you've got your computer, you've got your phone, you can interact with people and so on. And, most people's homes, relative to other countries are pretty nice here. Running water, heat, air conditioning, all those niceties. Most people have that. So to get people to go out and really complain about this is really difficult. It's easy to get Americans to roll over on stuff like this.
It has been initially. Now the pressure is different than it was at the beginning. When it was just temporary, that was one thing. And they told us if we need 14 days to flatten the curve. They never really defined that, but they showed a curve and they said, we need to flatten this curve, and you got 14 days to do it. At that point, most people thought I could do anything for 14 days. It's like I can go on vacation, just go home and do a staycation. And that was all kind of fun and games for a while. But now that the economies in many areas have been totally wrecked and unemployment has gone through the roof, and people can't find jobs, they don't have jobs, they're living hand to hand, they don't have savings, they ran out of savings some time ago. The pressure now is on. People are still at home, but they're running out of money. And I think the backlog right now of tenants who would otherwise have been kicked out for failure to pay rent is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 billion in back rent. Now, the government has forced the landowners, the building owners, to not evict those people that should be evicted. And I'm not making commentary on that. I'm just saying that there's a decay in economic status that's going on across the country. Very few people are talking about it, but the people who are living in that right now are under intense pressure. And you take somebody who's still at home, out of work, hasn't made a house payment in 6 months, haven't made their rent payment in 6 months, their car payment's in jeopardy, they're one step away from being homeless and they know it. And what's a person like that going to think as he sits there at home, watches his TV? It's just going to eat him alive. It's no wonder that counselors are seeing people for depression and PTSD. It's no wonder that people are committing suicide across the country in increasing numbers.
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous social and economic experiment that we're doing. The idea of restricting people for such an extended period of time, shutting down an economy for such an extended period of time, spending they just approved another 2 trillion, which puts us, I don't know, 5 or 6 trillion in spending on top. That's an experiment.
Yes.
This idea that you can tell everybody you don't have to pay your rent. And now in California, I don't know if this is true in Arizona also, but there's going to be a deal that the state will bail you out. Whatever you have owed, your accrued amount that you owe for rent, as long as the landlord will take a 20% haircut, the state will pay that bill. Yeah. So just a lot of what I say is dangerous experiments.
It is. And this is, I just have to say, this is not the future that America wanted. I guarantee you that. I mean, and nobody would say, oh, this is really what, this is what I wanted, envisioned for America. Nobody's going to say that.
So before we get to China's role in this, which I kind of want to make the focus, kind of to put a bow on COVID, I'm sure that you're concerned about the Great Reset. What do you see as the Great Reset?
This is the purpose right now of the COVID narrative, is to facilitate the Great Reset that's being promoted by the World Economic Forum and all of the global mucky mucks that belong to it. This is a global initiative. The global corporations are 100% behind it. They see trillions of dollars in their pocket as a result. And basically, the Great Reset is nothing more, it's a new name for most people. They never heard that before. But the Great Reset is just another marketing name for sustainable development, which is technocracy. I've documented that in my book, 6 Ways to Sunday. Technocracy and sustainable development are both resource-based economic systems designed to micromanage people and to control the resources of the world, period. This is what Klaus Schwab wants to do through the World Economic Forum. And he now, and the WEF, has said openly that the global pandemic and climate change are intimately linked in order to bring about their Great Reset New World Order. They're open about this. Now, this is not a conspiracy. This is not, nobody's wearing a tinfoil hat here. This is what they say on their own website, coming out of his own lips. This is what they want to do. Now, the Great Reset, that phrase and the phrase "Build Back Better," that's another phrase that WEF came out with, "Build Back Better."
Sorry, who came out with that?
The World Economic Forum.
That's not Biden's phrase?
Well, it is. So he says it. So do all the other leaders of the world. They're saying the same thing. We're going to build back better.
Oh, but I didn't realize. I thought that truly that was his campaign that came up with that.
No, he did not come up with that. That was not his phrase originally. But it's a clever phrase, right? And you have to parse it. Now, those of us who are English speakers understand when I say you need to parse a statement. What does it say? What does it mean? When you say "build back better," the best example I can give you is, let's say, heaven forbid, your house burns down. It's a shock, total loss. You're going to be for 2 or 3 months in complete dismay that your house burned down and you lost everything. You're going to work through the difficulties. Insurance company, if you had insurance, is eventually going to come around and say, well, we'll give you X dollars for your house so that you can do something else. If you want to do it over or whatever, they give you the money. And you kind of pull your bootstraps up, and after a while you say, I'm going to lick this. This was a very devastating thing to have my house burn down and lose everything. But now I'm going to build back better. That's an attitude of hope for you, that you're going to build back better. But what does it imply? It implies that your house burned down, for Pete's sake. When somebody says they're going to build back better, it means that something has been burned down, namely the economic system of the planet, and you're going to build back better? This is very dangerous talk. The only group in the world that has sworn to destroy capitalism and free enterprise is the United Nations. Well, that's the technocrats at the United Nations. They're pledged to replace free market economics with sustainable development. That's the Great Reset. That's the Build Back Better. They need to murder, literally, the economic system of the planet in order to build back better on its ashes.
Well, and it has been murdered by COVID shutdowns.
Yes, it has.
They had the excuse. They had the don't let a great what's the word, catastrophe or whatever go to waste.
That's right. Yeah, don't let it go to waste. I have documented on technocracy.news, by the way, that the original panic that started was at the hands of the same people who have been promoting climate alarmism, global warming alarmism for years. Same people, using the same flawed computer models, using the same academic credentials to hide behind, like we're experts, This was a program of the same people that have brought us climate change catastrophe, fear-mongering. For all these years, it hasn't worked, but now they have dead bodies to show, and they're having a heyday. This is their initiative. This is their narrative.
And it's the same. We all need to do this together. This needs to be a community. The world needs to come together for this. And you also have them blaming deniers, right? You have climate change deniers and you have COVID deniers, and they shame you and they deplatform you, etc. if you question things regarding COVID or climate change.
Yes, exactly what happened with climate change. I'll never forget the day that Al Gore, talking about his film An Inconvenient Truth or something like that, where he said that climate deniers deserve to be punished. Deserve to be punished. Climate deniers deserve to be punished. That's dangerous talk for anybody. But for those who question the climate narrative, the science, and I'm not just people like me, but I mean legitimate astrophysicists and climate scientists of various whatever, they want to question these other findings that clearly have been corrupted with corrupted data. They're called climate deniers, and they deserve to be punished. Now you have the same thing happening with the COVID deniers. That's supposed, whatever the pandemic, the face mask deniers.
And they are being punished. I mean, I don't think there's any question
Ooh,
that you are ostracized in the scientific community if you
yeah,
question it. And I think that there's
yeah,
tons of them that just choose to, it's not worth losing my career over. I'll just keep quiet about it.
right,
And same
right.
thing is going on in the medical community with doctors who might say that, well, actually, hydroxychloroquine actually is a good treatment for COVID, but it's gotten so politicized and they'll be ostracized if they promote it that they just go quiet.
Yes, it becomes self censorship at that point,
Hmm.
where they shut up for fear of being ostracized.
Yeah. So yeah, the links between the two are scary, and they were using climate change, and now COVID. They've hopped on COVID. It seems like an even easier thing to use for a great reset.
Well, the one thing they never had with climate change was dead bodies. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but there was no dead bodies. Nobody ever died from climate change.
They claim people are dying from climate change.
Well, they do, but they can't produce pictures of the bodies. Now, the polar bears, the polar bears, they say are dying. They tried to get that off, but that ran out of steam too. But now that they can show people in body bags anywhere and say that's because of COVID, people believe that. And that has fulfilled poor little Greta Thunberg's dreams that you need to behave as if your house is on fire. And people are behaving that way now. They got their attention because of the dead bodies. The perfect storm for sustainable development in the Great Reset.
So I know you would consider China to be a technocracy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and obviously looking to become the world's most dominant power seems pretty obvious that that's an objective of theirs.
Yes.
It seems as if now it's confirmed that this virus came from a Chinese lab,
Yeah.
the Chinese lab that's always been discussed, even though early on people were convinced that it came from bats or rodents, the wet marks, and so on. China has even thrown out there lately that it came from Spain, but I saw a couple experts on Bill Maher, known for being a guy from the left, and they just flat out said it's 110% that it came from a lab. So
Yeah.
what do you know about that? And let's talk about what's behind this as far as China is concerned.
The most credible evidence and analysis at this point said it came from a lab.
U.S. intelligence also has said that, right?
Yes. And I don't think there's any doubt. The Chinese are never going to admit this. You know that. They're going to lie. They're going to throw up flack to take people off the trail. But their behavior does nothing more than confirm what Western experts say, that it came from their laboratory. Now, what nobody's really saying a whole lot about is that that laboratory had a lot of Western connections, and it did. They received money from the West and from people in the United States as well as Europe. This was not just, we can't just look at it and say, oh, it's just China doing this. What are these other people doing involved with it? What's Fauci's role with that particular laboratory and virus research that they were doing? And there is a connection. I got questions. We don't have all the answers, but that seems to be where it came from. Pretty much everybody in the universe at this point is pointing to the Wuhan virology lab there as being the source of this. Now, question was it accidentally released or was it intentionally released? That question isn't answered. That's just, if they say where it was developed, doesn't really answer that critical question. Was it purposeful or was it accidentally released?
Well, what is that lab does what? It studies infectious diseases. Does it create diseases in order to study them? What do we know about the lab?
Well, that's exactly what they do. It's a level 4 lab, which means it's the most secure in the world. That's the designation. It's supposed to be escape proof. There's not that many level 4 laboratories around the world, but they're supposed to be so secure that they're escape proof. And this may prove it wrong. this actually, some people are saying, well, that proves that they released it on purpose because the lab should never have, but there's arguments on that in both directions. But they studied at that virology lab the creation of variants of viruses to promote what they call gain of function. And this is an experimental, genetically modified practice of seeing what can be done with viruses as biological weapons. This has been going on around the world in these types of labs ever since they were created, ever since they really got a handle on, especially on CRISPR technology to do genetic modification. So this is their business, to do this kind of thing. And, did they specifically engineer this virus to do what it's doing today? Nobody can really answer that question because, the people on the inside of the lab aren't talking. Well, they can't talk because China took care of that. they open their mouth, they're dead. They'll just disappear and their whole families and then go into a black hole.
So if you think the lab was experimenting with bioweapons, why would the West have been giving money to this lab? I could see the West donating something that's studying infectious diseases for the human benefit, but not bioweapons.
The West has been involved in this kind of stuff for a very, very long time. This is not new. You hope, as citizens, at least in America, we hope that there is never a meltdown or a massive leak in some of these level 4 laboratories. A lot of people are concerned about it. We used to be concerned that a nuclear reactor somewhere is going to melt down and release radiation. That would be nothing compared to what would happen if one of these labs all of a sudden threw open the door and all their stuff inside got out. It would be, the end of America probably, and maybe the whole world. Why should technocrats like this experiment with such things? They shouldn't. In my opinion, nobody should be doing this kind of experiment. But they do it because they can. They do it because they have taxpayer money. They don't come up with the money to do this. It's all given to them. They've never worked an honest day in their life, so to speak, to generate wealth or generate income. They're given a salary to develop this kind of stuff. You say, well, okay, so who gives them the salaries? Well, the government gives them the salaries. That's who. And in our case, through our government and through the NIH that Fauci has been head of for years, money flows to organizations like this to do research. It's pretty crazy and pretty convoluted. And pretty.
Yeah, it's stunning that, they're our largest geopolitical foe / enemy. The fact that we would cooperate with them on anything like this is hard to believe.
I can tell you why. I have a very good theory why this happens this way. Because the technocrats who run China are fully engaged with the technocrats in the rest of the world. That's not everyone, but the technocrats in the rest of the world. They're very cozy, and they change information back and forth like it's nothing. The technocrats in China believe that they have a right to any other data and any other research and science in the world. They think they have a right to that. What copyright is aside and patents aside, they think if it exists, they have a right to get it, and vice versa. So we see people, unusual bedfellows. We see people like Elon Musk, for instance, building a partnership with China for one of its largest gigaplants. He loves China. He's praised China for its being a great place, and America is all backwards and out of date, and we should be more like China. Really, you live here, Elon Musk, just moved to Texas. He's exhibited libertarian leanings from time to time, but Elon Musk's grandfather was head of technocracy in Canada during the 30s and 40s. He grew up in that home. He understands technocracy, and he's a technocrat. He loves the technocrats in China, where you have a more autocratic or authoritarian government can do anything it wants, and it does. China acts more like Musk runs his factory. They love that. They're birds of a feather flock together. Now you have somebody like Fauci and his cronies. They're also in the same boat. They're technocrats. They love what's going on over there in China because they can do more things than they can do here. So I don't think there's any barrier from people in the West who think this way, who have a mind of a technocrat. I don't think there's any barrier for them to not work with somebody like China.
Yeah, it does seem to me that there's a big risk that people are going to start looking to China as the model to follow. I mean, just the statements you just mentioned from Musk and Fauci and so on, as shocking as that statement would be 10 or 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
as America kind of muddles along here, and our economy is probably not going to do great over the next 4 years, and you see China recovering quickly and so on, that people think that that's a model for success.
They do.
But what I would say is a centrally controlled economy, which China used to be closer to 100% centrally controlled. I think that they've become decentralized and allowed some level of private enterprise in the past 20 years, which explains their resurgence, right? It's actually infusion of some element of private enterprise is really what's caused them to take off. But nonetheless, it's still a primarily centrally controlled economy, which I argue will always eventually implode. So is that a good prediction for what's going to ultimately happen to China or not?
I honestly, I don't quite see it that way. I look at the people that are making what look to be capitalist inroads, like Jack Ma as an example. He's a billionaire, much like Elon Musk in a lot of ways. He rose up, and started a business, made a lot of money. But Jack Ma is not purely a communist for sure. He's really exhibiting all the behavior of a technocrat. And there's a lot of people like that in China. And China's leadership is mostly scientific oriented. They're engineers and scientists themselves with advanced degrees. Many of them have PhDs. And they're using the technology to engineer society. That's the mark of a technocracy. It's not, in other words, they're not using communism as a tool to monitor or to control the people. They're using a technocratic system of social control. In the early days in America, technocrats called that the science of social engineering. China has mastered that today with advanced technology. So what we see going on in China today with its economic system is engineered to be a technocracy. They're exporting their technocracy around the world for instance, to Africa, to South America, a lot to Europe, and it's also coming back on us here in America. It's repeating in America. But China's exporting this ideology, and it's been with them a very long time from the very beginning when Zbigniew Brzezinski first brought China into the world stage again in 1976. They didn't teach Chairman Deng capitalism and free enterprise. They taught him technocracy and the principles of technocracy. And this is what they've grown up with. Now, could they implode? Yes. I thought for over 10 years now that they should have imploded because they have the screwiest economic system that you could ever imagine. They really do. It's so corrupt and it's so full of holes. From an economic analysis point of view, I used to say these guys are just going to completely blow themselves up economically. But you know what? It's never happened. They're still going, and they're still engineering, their economic system and their society, and they haven't imploded, and they haven't, completely gone bazonkers now. And now they're leading in some areas where you wonder if they really get control of this, can anything stop them? Good question.
Are they maybe succeeding in spite of themselves, in spite of this corrupt system, essentially controlled system, because essentially the West is allowing it? I mean, we've handed them so much business. Big tech loves China, I think, because they make our goods very cheaply and they buy our goods. So Silicon Valley is selling to China and also taking advantage of very low labor rates there. But
Yeah.
as long as the rest of the world continues to feed China so much business
Mhm.
in both directions, they've got nowhere else to go but up.
It would seem that way. Now they could have difficulties. Something could happen to them just as much as it could here, I suppose, or anywhere else. But somebody probably ought to be asking the question, considering that the global economic system has been murdered by COVID. Did China have any intention or any role in that? Did they have, in other words, did they have it out to murder the economic system of capitalism and free enterprise?
Well, let's go down that rabbit hole just a little bit. Is that a theory that COVID would have been intentionally leaked out of this lab?
It would be. It actually would be. And even if it was accidental, let's just say it was accidental for a minute. Um, Once it was discovered to be released, would they jump on it for that purpose and fan the flames of panic around the world to destroy the global economic system? Maybe that's a better way to put it without touching
Yeah,
on the
I just
issue.
can't imagine that anyone could have predicted in China that if something like this was released, either intentionally or once, as you point out, once it was released, deciding to pursue this, that America, they could have predicted that America would shut down its economy as it did. I mean, that would be tough to predict. You'd have to predict exactly what would happen with COVID once it started spreading the world, how much of an impact would it have, and then also what would
Yeah.
be the political response to it. That it just seems to me to be tough to predict. I know I sure as heck would never predicted that America would respond this way.
Here's how it happened, though. We've pretty much discovered now the mechanism that how the whole world all of a sudden froze up. It's like having the engine in your car seize, right? Just seize up because you didn't have oil in it or something. What happened on a global basis was the United Nations for years has been laying the groundwork around the world with treaties between companies or between countries, excuse me, and the United Nations. And these treaties have put a binder on nations to behave a certain way during health emergencies, according to what the WHO tells them to do. That's a UN agency. All these treaties were in place before COVID hit. This happened over a period of years. That these treaties were put in place. You know, like we have, for instance, the climate, the Paris Climate Agreement. It's not quite a treaty, but it has the same effect. It was signed by all the nations of the world. Well, nations have signed these treaties, big and small, Africa, South America, Europe, it doesn't matter where they are, but virtually every nation in the world has signed these treaties that they will obey the World Health Organization during a health emergency, global health emergency. The United Nations pulled the chain on all of those treaties at the same time in early 2020 to cause the whole policy mechanism to be activated across the globe. And they jawboned these countries and said, you can't say no because you're under treaty on this. You must do it. You cannot be an outlier. But the countries on either side of you are going to do it. You don't do it. You're going to kill them all if you don't behave and do what we say. And initially, the entire planet knuckled under to this. And all of a sudden, you wake up 30 days later, forget flattening the curve. You wake up 30 days later, and the entire world economic system is at a standstill. This is how they did it. They took the policies that came out of the initial, and by the way, the policies originated in China, the mask, wearing masks, social distancing, lockdowns, and so on. They were spread to the world and back to the United Nations through the London School in London. And one of the professors, their original epidemiologist that released a study, said we're all going to die. Put those policies out right on the back of his study, of his model, computer model. This is what you need to do. The United Nations just picked that up and slapped it down on all the countries of the world. This is what you have to do to protect yourselves and the rest of your neighbors. Do it now, or else, suffer our wrath.
And so these countries really would be in violation of a treaty if they had not implemented lockdowns.
Right. That's exactly right.
And that's a treaty that is with the UN, or it's a treaty among nations where they say we're all going to adhere to these UN or WHO
In this
policies.
case, it was both, that the UN was the orchestrator of the treaties.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, and it's a great explanation, because one of the things I was always questioning about it was the fact that every country was doing the same thing. And so it's what caused me to think, well, I think US is overreacting to this thing, but if every world leader is seeing this and acting the same way, I must be missing something. They must know something that I don't know. But what
Right.
you're saying is no, it's all coming from one place, the WHO.
Yes. And the pressure is intense because violating a treaty can lead to things like sanctions and economic harm and political isolation. And, there's all kinds of browbeating that can go on. Just imagine if the United States just flat out said, we're not going to do it. And then Canada and Mexico, who are doing it, they step up and they take a complaint to the World Trade Organization or somebody that, hey, those people in the United States are adversely affecting our societies because they refuse to wear face masks.
Well, but there is someone who didn't do it, and that's Sweden. So let's talk about Sweden for a moment. Did they violate some treaty by not locking down like everyone else?
I honestly, I'm not sure in that specific case if they are, but Sweden did buck the trend and they had a good outcome. There have been a couple of other countries that, I think Isle of Man just, not a very big country either, but I think they said that they are basically COVID free right now. And there's been a few islands, I think, out in the Pacific that are COVID free, maybe just because they're already isolated. I don't know. But yeah, good
It's
question.
amazing how little you hear about Sweden.
Yeah,
They don't.
right.
Nobody wants to talk about Sweden.
No, no. Sweden is just a stupid exception. There's all these excuses on why, but no, they don't want to talk about it because it disproves their entire model. Not Sweden's model, but it disproves everything that the World Health Organization is trying to get people to do. And now honestly, the truth is coming out now. I believe there's more and more studies coming out that just say this is absolute nonsense, that we have limited the spread of a virus. And now they're telling us, I just saw this morning, now they're telling us that there are thousands of variants, mutations of this virus floating around the world, thousands of mutations. Well, anybody that's lived for very long knows that a coronavirus, it morphs into
It's the
other
cold, right?
variants.
It's a form of the cold.
It is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, okay, so it's got thousands of variants. Well, they're using that now to scare us. And basically, it means this is going to be permanent. We're going to have to be fighting this virus forever.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a clear way out. Tell us, what would be the incentive of nations to keep this going, to not knock it out and be able to say that that's now in the past? What would be the perverse incentive for them to keep
I
it
know.
going in one form or another?
The carrot that is being held out is coming from the multinational corporations through, like, for instance, the auspices of the World Economic Forum. And that's just a front. I realize that. We should just look at it as a front. WEF doesn't have some kind of a dictatorial power over the planet. It doesn't. But it has accumulated all of these global elitists from the planet, the biggest multinational global corporations, the top leaders, the top people involved in sustainable development, and the NGOs that are trying to lock up resources and stuff around the world. They got all these big mucky mucks in one place, and then they talk to them and they jawbone them. It's been estimated that for the Great Reset or for sustainable development, same thing, to actually
Or build back better, same thing. You're telling us.
Some of the estimates now are saying it's going to take between 30 and 50 trillion dollars to apply this Green New Deal thing across the planet. Just imagine now, $50 trillion could be potentially up for grabs for these multinational corporations. We're talking feeding frenzy here. This kind of money cannot be ignored, but this is what people like Klaus Schwab are saying. Yes, it's going to cost money, taxpayer money, of course, but we're going to have to suck this wealth out of somebody to pay for the Great Reset. And it's going to come out of the middle and lower classes, unfortunately. But to the big companies, they want a piece of this action. I think it's just an easy thing to understand. Trillions and trillions of dollars are going to be spent in futility, in my opinion, to flip the world into an otherworldly economic system. But they will do it for the sake of short-term greed or more short-term greed. And that'll be one of the incentives they have to get into it. Now, the countries of the world are all bucking to get those companies to come to their countries. Just remember when Amazon said that they were going to have another headquarters, what happened in the United States, all of a sudden, all of the cities of, the big cities in America went berserk and tried to win the attention of Amazon. Come here, come here. It's like carnival barkers, saying, come play this game, 3 for $1. It was a feeding frenzy. Because they knew if Amazon headquarters came to their city, whoa, they're going to be in big time. We got Amazon, baby. We're on fire. Well, just imagine the countries of the world buying for these giant corporations to come and put their roots down there or put a big headquarters there or something and focus their attention on our country. Everybody now is a chamber of commerce, right? They all want the big players to come to them.
I was just thinking that if COVID were to go away tomorrow, everybody would go back to work. Stadiums are filled again. Economy is taking off again. And there's no longer this urgent need to implement all these things they're implementing that are essentially redistribution of wealth, which is people only have to pay 25% rent. Rent is forgiven. Checks to the poor, this and that, all these things that they're doing. They don't get to do any of that if they turn the economy back on.
It's going to be interesting to see if it were possible. I don't think it's going to happen, but if it were possible one day that the president just stands up and says, the threat is over, the emergency is over, go back to business. I don't think that the world, the people of the world, and the organizations of the world that are so embedded in this, I don't think they're just all of a sudden going to follow suit and say, emergency's over, throw all that stuff out, let's just forget it. One of the reasons I say that, I liken it to a giant ship on the ocean that is cruising along in one direction, say it's going north, and all of a sudden it decides it needs to turn and go west, or maybe turn around and go back. It takes a long time to steer a large ship with a small rudder. A long time. And that's kind of the way economic systems are. They don't turn quickly. Social systems don't turn quickly. Fads don't appear so quickly and disappear so quickly.
Although this appeared pretty quickly, but I get where you're going, but go ahead.
Well, it kind of appears that way, I suppose. In some cases, some fads, of course, can appear pretty quickly and they spread like wildfire. But they don't go away nearly as quickly as they appeared if that were the case. When fear is involved, fear is a very difficult emotion to manage and get rid of individually and in society as well. And in spite of a leader saying that the emergency is over, the fear is going to remain down in the lower levels of society, and the wannabe tyrants that have taken advantage of all these things themselves, they're not going to be eager to give up their little fiefdoms now that all of a sudden they've figured out, man, I can really make it with this one. You look at people like in Michigan, like the governor there, what's her name, Whitmer. She wouldn't let go of this stuff even if President Biden said, stop it. She's going to continue with her lockdown, and she's got power. She's got control. This is what politicians want. They're not going to just say, oh, we better be we better err on the side of caution here and keep it going for a while, maybe another 14 days. We'll flatten the curve and then we'll let it go.
Yeah, that natural instinct of some politicians, which at this point are the majority of politicians in the U.S.,
Yes.
of knowing better and protecting your health. The Bloomberg 16-ounce soda rule.
Yes.
We've handed them the keys to our health, and now they're in control, and they like that.
That's exactly right. And I hate to say, too, if it weren't just for the policies of, the policies themselves of face masks, social distancing, et cetera, shutdowns, school shutdowns, now you have introduced on top of that what I think was probably the original goal is the whole vaccination narrative, where big pharma now has its access to the human body and to the human genome. They're not going to let up on that. I can guarantee you. If somebody says there's no emergency, we don't need that anymore, they're going to say, well, you still need the vaccine,
Well, that's a good place for us to finish on, because that was one subject I want to get to, which is this DNA collection. 60 Minutes covered it over the weekend. At this point, probably almost all Americans have been tested at some point for COVID, and those swabs have your DNA on them. And the report is that China has been trying to use COVID tests to collect the DNA of all Americans. A, is this really happening? And B, why does China want the DNA of Americans?
Yes, I know it. It is happening. And you know what? The implication of that story is China's trying to steal our DNA, but our government would never do something like that. That's the implication. I got bad news for people. China wants our DNA, but it's already being collected by people here in the United States. Nilly-willy. Anywhere they can get it, they'll get it if they can tag it and get it into the database. And
well, let me stop you there and just see if you happen to know the answer to this. So I go to the doctor, I get a swab in a COVID test, comes back negative, but that is sitting somewhere. That test is sitting somewhere. It has my DNA in it.
Yes.
Are you telling me that that's going somewhere else? It's not just dying in that lab?
That's exactly what I would say, that is not going to just sit there and be destroyed on the spot. That sample, and I've gone round and round with testing labs here in Arizona to find out what happens to the biological samples that you take from me. These same testing companies, so it doesn't matter. They draw your blood or whatever, they prick your finger, stick a needle in there and get blood out in the vials. What do you do with that blood? You're testing me for thyroid or for something, what do you do with the blood after it's all done testing for what I asked for? Is it going to anywhere to, match my DNA? Most of the people are ignorant at the bottom, but you go back up far enough, whatever, and read the terms of service. Gotcha. And yes, they can do anything they want to do with your blood once you have paid for it and you've done, you got your results. Your blood is now free business. Just like Google takes your data that you never know goes out to them to sell, your DNA also, just like that. It's the same idea. It's free-floating data, and data is the new oil of the 21st century. Everybody wants the data. Our government wants the data. China wants the data. And the question is why? Let's talk about China. China has been in the business with Western help of genetically engineering organisms that affect the human body. This is not a trick question, but I'm going to kind of ask it that way. If China could get a hold of a complete profile of Americans' DNA structure, would that potentially be a national security risk if they focused that data, for instance, in a place like the Wuhan lab, and they used that widespread across our whole society genetic information to genetically engineer yet another virus that would be more specific to attack Americans? Is that possible? Yes, it is. Is it probable? No, I'm not saying it's probable. But why should people be excited about China collecting American DNA? Well, duh. They, it's just like, this is just so in your face, blatant. It's not even funny. Of course, they would want it if they could get it.
So they would want it because theoretically they could, as you say, release a virus, which would be a bioweapon.
Absolutely. We're talking biowarfare here.
Or they could use it to profit from it, though, right?
Absolutely.
I think, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if it weren't just that, let's just talk about the drug manufacturing. You know, like 90% of our drugs right now, we're dependent on China for it. With the knowledge of our DNA, they could put such a lock on drug manufacturing that they would control us through drugs eventually completely. That might just be an economic type of a thing rather than a bioweapon. But China has already identified itself as being an enemy of the West through its cyber warfare and through its experimentation with bio warfare. And America hasn't taken that very seriously over a period of time, I have to say. They just haven't. Biosecurity has had a backseat to cyber security with all the hacking and stuff that's taken place from China. But then we've had hacking from Russia, from East Germany, the Eastern Bloc in Europe, all over the place. Would people want to use these advanced technologies to create warfare situations? Of course they would. They don't.
Following up on China and China policy, Trump had a tough on China policy, but I didn't consider his policies to really be that tough. I mean,
Yeah.
right? We needed to get a lot tougher. At least he was turning the tide to being tougher on China. There's all kinds of things we need to get tougher on them. But now I presume you would say that whatever he's done is going to be reversed and we're going to be back to being extremely weak with China.
Yes. It's tough. I knew a professor of aeronautics at the University of Michigan, I believe it was, tenured. And he watched over a period of years as the aerospace technology was stolen from their department by China. And he became kind of a whistleblower. He raised a protest in his own school, university.
How was it being stolen?
Chinese coming over and going to school there and
wow, like graduate students.
Yeah, like stealing the technology and taking it back to China. Patented technology that was being developed there, they were taking it away and taking it anyway. He complained about it, and it ended up. I mean, I talked to him at length about this several years ago, and he said it was just outrageous. It was in your face. It was almost like, you can't stop me. Give me that. I'm taking it. And it just drove him insane. And he finally tried to make a big protest at the university over it, and he got fired. Don't want any part of it. Got fired. And I'm not sure he's even alive today. He might have passed since then, but I'll tell you, he was just absolutely livid over this theft of intellectual property. This is how China has made a lot of their advances and stuff, is by stealing it, literally stealing it from the West. But to the professor that was the whistleblower, to him it was outrageous. It was a crime. To the people inside the university cooperating with the Chinese, it was just technocrats helping technocrats. Well, of course you can have it. Here, see what you can do with it now. And it's like, well, this is a different planet they live on. But if it exists, they want it, and they think they have a right to it. So, we've been infiltrated in America. The Chinese have deep, deep claws into American society right now in so many different ways, through corporate ownership, through ownership of media interests, farmland. There's huge amounts of farmland that are owned by Chinese now in our country. We have a hard time to get rid of the influence in America at this point.
Yeah, a lot of it has been naivete, but a lot of it's just been good old fashioned greed. Even with your
Yes.
university story,
Yes.
they're making a lot of money off of these students that come from China.
Yes, they are. Exactly right.
Yeah.
That was one of the excuses they said.
Thank you again to Patrick Wood for coming on our show again. This was his second appearance on the Hidden Truth Show. Please go check out his book on Amazon, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And thank you to our producer, Michael Parker, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.